The Bible tells us very clearly that God brought a great flood to cover the whole world. When you look at the true evidence that you can see with your own eyes, you look at the fossils, you look at the strata, the only logical explanation of that is a worldwide flood.
We're going to give you 22 questions about the ark and the flood. How could Noah build an ark back then? After this global flood, where did all the water go? What was the actual size of the ark? What about the dinosaurs? Surely they wouldn't all be able to fit on the ark.
Well, the answer to that is...
The story of Noah's Ark and the flood is known worldwide. The motif of the ark on top of a mountain with two giraffes' necks sticking out the top is a staple in Sunday school classrooms. But is that close to what the ark was actually like? I'm here with Rod Walsh. In 1997, he constructed a to-scale model of the ark with months of research, giving him the ability to make it as close to the original as possible. So Rod, welcome.
Thank you.
You're going to answer today 22 questions about Noah's Ark and the flood.
Yep.
But can I first ask you, why did you build this replica and what sort of impact has that had as you've shared that with people?
Well, I've got to go back to, as a child, I was a prolific model builder, but only between the ages of 7 and 10. But then I never built another model till April 1997. Now, I happened to be in bed with a crook back for 4 days. I had to virtually crawl on my hands and knees to get to the toilet.
Oh, wow.
So I'm wondering what I'm going to do. Well, I love reading the Bible, so I started reading the Bible from the very beginning in Genesis chapter 1. When I got to the account of Noah, God illuminated the whole story. He said, Rod, build a model of Noah's Ark. Well, I thought my back's gone, now my head's gone. But I've heard God before. I knew it was God speaking to me very clearly. In fact, the next day, I've scaled it down. I've sketched it out. I'm ready to go on the second day. And then all of a sudden, God spoke to me again, and he actually confirmed it. He said, Rod, turn the radio on. I turned the radio on. For the next 20 minutes, they're talking about Noah's Ark. But they were mocking it, laughing. Who'd believe in Noah's Ark in this scientific age? God said, see what I mean? Build a model. When it's finished, people will come to you and ask questions. You'll just answer them. Well, this is what you can do if you don't watch TV for 7 months. 3 hours a day, 200 days, 600 hours work went into building that model.
Wow.
Then the model was finished. Nothing happened for a few weeks. And then in January 1998, 2 days before a huge waterfront boating festival, an annual event in Geelong, thousands come from all over Australia, God spoke to me and said, submit your model. Well, you don't normally turn up with 2 days' notice. You've got to book months in advance. I found out who the organiser was. Remember, it's a boating festival. I said, I've got the model of the oldest boat on record. Would you be interested? They gave me the best spot. Do you know, for the next 3 days, Nancy and I never sat down. We had half a dozen to 15 to 20 people firing questions. From there, we actually did, in 7 years, part-time, I did 600 venues around Australia. I never organised one. God opened every door. The team will actually bring the ark in so we can actually see how big the ark was, and we can maybe cut to some of that footage as we continue our talk.
Fantastic. Well, Rod, I'm sure you have been asked every question under the sun. So we're going to give you 22 questions about the ark and the flood, starting from the beginning.
Yeah.
So number one, why did God send a flood?
Yeah, that's a good question, but we have to go back to the beginning. See, in the beginning, it was God who created the heavens and the earth. And the Bible tells us very clearly that mankind was created different, distinct from the rest of the animal kingdom. In the beginning, it was very good, not just good. The Bible says it was very good. There was no death, sickness, or violence. Adam and Eve and all the animals ate fruit, nuts, and veggies. It was an absolute wonderful paradise. So what happened to destroy that? Well, of course, Adam and Eve disobeyed God. See, because of their sin and their rebellion came the curse with death, thorns, and thistles. And later on, of course, Cain killed Abel, then Lamech killed a young man. 1,500 years later, we come to the days of Noah, when Noah was 500 years old. Now, at this particular time, there was a great increase in population, but sadly, a great increase in wickedness. Remember how good it was in the beginning? Listen what it says in Genesis 6:5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, that every imagination, every thought of the heart was evil continually. So things have gone pretty bad by then, haven't they, really? It's not like there were good people occasionally mucking up. It's that every thought, of the heart was evil continually. And in Genesis 6:11, it also says that the earth was corrupt and filled with violence. And God now confided in Noah, told him because of all the violence and the evil going on, he's going to bring a great flood to cover the whole world.
Okay, question number 2. How could Noah build an ark back then?
Well, first of all, God gave Noah detailed instructions on building the ark. And of course, when we look at ancient people, they're very intelligent. For example, we go back to Tubal-Cain, 1,000 years before Noah built the ark. He was an expert in making tools out of iron and bronze. Jubal at this time was an expert in making musical instruments.
These are people recorded in the Bible?
In the Bible, yeah. If we go back to ancient buildings, for example, in Rome and Greece, still standing today. We actually visited the Colosseum in 2016. What an amazing building, completed 2,000 years ago. Pyramids too are incredible, completed, over 3,000 years ago. So ancient man was very, very intelligent. Also, if we go back to, look at ancient shipbuilding, a study of ancient shipbuilding, you find that, you had high technology from the very beginning. Noah would have had no problem in actually building the ark when you have a serious look of ancient shipbuilding. Lionel Casson, for example, is in his book Ships and Seafaring of Ancient Times. He writes in his book about the technology of ancient times and the use of mortise and tenon joints. Roman ships have been found in the Mediterranean, for example, with planks fastened with these mortise and tenon joints way back. Then they've actually proven that it goes back as far as 2000 BC. They've even found mortise and tenon joints only 10 centimetres apart in other shipwrecks that they've found in the Mediterranean. Now imagine the strength of that boat when it's locked together every 10 centimetres. And Roman ships have been, wrecks have been found going back to 100 BC, and not only with mortise and tenon joints, but double layers of planks. So it's incredible. And not only that, they were fixed together with mortise and tenon joints, and they were then covered with a tarred fabric and thin lead sheeting. So, the technology back then was quite great, really, when you think about it. And huge ships have been built in the past. For example, if you go back to 1500 BC, Queen Hatshepsut, she built this enormous barge, which was something like 69 metres long, 61 metres, I should say, 200 feet long, and 21 metres or 69 foot wide. Now, this was larger and broader than Admiral Lord Nelson's great warship, the HMS Victory, which was a wonderful ship that took in the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. And so there's huge ships that have been found. If you go right back to 200 BC, we find a monster ship was built by Ptolemy IV. Now, this monster ship was something like 128 metres or 420 foot long, and it carried 4,000 oarsmen, 400 sailors, and something like 2,850 Marines. I mean, imagine going back then to see, fighting against that monster ship.
Before we continue, a quick heads up. Stick around until the end of the interview because we'll be offering a free ebook, the Creation Answers book, which is packed with biblical answers to over 60 of the most asked questions about creation, evolution, and the Bible. You won't want to miss it. Now, back to the interview.
So the thing is, a lot of people don't realise that, the ancient technology of shipbuilding and buildings and stuff was really good.
I could understand how they might not if we're also taught to some extent that as we go back in time, ancient man was much less intelligent. We seem to get that impression from many things these days. So that actually contradicts each other.
Well, it does, yeah. If you look at, I mean, we haven't got the, internet and stuff like that back then. But if you look at the things that they used to do, with the use of mortise and tenon joints and things like that, were very high in technology. God told Noah to build this out of gopher wood. Well, there are many interpretations of gopher wood. Some say it's this tree or that tree, but one of them is a processed laminated wood. Now imagine thick beams, 1/2 metre wide, Then you've got thick planks, but multi-layers of them, fixed together with mortise and tenon joints, pinned through with dowels. See, the side of Noah's Ark could have been 1 metre thick like solid plywood. It was incredibly strong, well built.
Okay. Following on from this, question 3, what was the actual size of the ark?
Well, the ark was enormous. It was 300 cubits long. A cubit is from your elbow to the outstretched middle finger. Okay. On an average man, that's about 1/2 metre. So 300 cubits, 150 metres. That's 3 Olympic swimming pools connected end to end.
Okay.
We came out from England as migrants, come out in 55, but we went back to England again, then we come back out again. And the ship we come back out again was a converted World War II aircraft carrier, exactly the same size as Noah's Ark. So it's quite a big ship, even, especially for those days, yeah. Now, it was 50 cubits or 25 metres wide, 30 cubits or 15 metres in height. Now, that's the height of a 4 to 5 storey building. Okay. And it was also had a cubit window at the top. If you can imagine the ark, comes up like that, but right near the top, you've got this extra little piece, about 10 foot wide, and that's where the cubit window was, each side. And there was a big shaft or opening right through the ark. And so the cold air dropping in from outside, the heat from the animals rising, just changed the air regularly inside the ark. They've actually proven to be really good ventilation system according to smoke tests. And not only that, the light penetrated all the way through to the lower level. Of course, your eyes, they can adjust, can't they? So there's plenty of light right down to the lower level. So good ventilation, good lighting, straight through to the ark. And the ark had 3 levels, but each level was very high. That's about 5 metres or 16.5 feet high. So there's no problem with very tall animals going on board the ark, was there?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, question 4, Rod.
Right.
We know God designed the ark, but was it very stable?
Well, amazingly so, really. It's fantastic when you look at the stability of it. David Collins, he's a naval architect in the US, and he showed us that it could withstand 210 knot winds. That's 390 kilometre winds. And he also said that the 6-to-1 ratio was optimal for riding large waves comfortably. There's also Korean naval architects have done, a lot of testing on the shape of Noah's Ark. And they actually published a paper examining 3 major safety parameters. One was structural, the other was overturning stability, and the other one was sea-keeping quality. And what they found was that the ribs on the ark had to be at least 1/2 metre wide, right? And the planking at least 30 centimetres wide. And that would, given stability, not only stability, I should say, the sea-keeping quality of the ark. They also said that it should be noted that the ark was 13 times more stable, right, than the standard for safety required by the American Bureau of Shipping. So that's amazing, isn't it? 13 times more stable. And it was proven, actually, to be incredibly stable in waves over 30 metres or 100 foot in height.
30 metres.
Imagine that. And they concluded that the ark actually had superior safety compared to other forms of ship structure. So it was certainly very, very stable, wasn't it?
So with that kind of amazing stability, do people still build ships like that, boats?
That's a good question, Jess, because they actually build the new oil tankers virtually in the shape of Noah's Ark.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? They used to build long, skinny ones. Well, they broke up, caused pollution all over the world. Korean architects now found out that if you want to be really stable, you build them in the shape of Noah's Ark. See, that 6-to-1 ratio is very important.
Okay. All right, question 5.
Yeah.
So how did they cut the wood to build the ark?
Well, you see, we've forgotten how people did things in the past. Now, if you go back, the people who used to cut wooden sleepers for the railway tracks in the early 1900s, a good worker, he could go out and cut down the selected trees, right, and shape them into a perfect railway sleeper. And by the end of the day, he's got 12 2.75 metre sleepers. That's 33 metres of planking in one day.
What is he using to do this?
Just a broad axe, nothing but a broad axe and an adze.
Okay.
Right? And if you extend that out for, say, 30 days, that means they would cut 1 kilometre of planking in 30 days using no more than a broad axe and an adze. But it's not to say they didn't have higher technology, is it? Because a long time for people to invent things from time of, Tubal Cain, for example.
All right, question 6. How did they steer the ark?
Well, they didn't have to. If you look at the model, there's no propeller, no sail, no rudder. And you see, Noah didn't have to steer it, it wasn't going anywhere. And, it just had to float, basically, for 5 months. And the whole world was covered in water. And then God would have then, I believe, just blown it into the right spot. I mean, when we think of Jesus, when he talks about stopping the wind and the waves in Mark, I think it's 39 to 41, he's got control over all these things. So why would Noah have to do anything? God would have just blown it into the right spot at the right time. That's all that had to be done.
Okay, so it didn't actually need to go anywhere, so it didn't need to be steered anywhere.
No.
And God could have made sure it was safely landing somewhere where it needed to be.
Yep.
Okay. All right, question 7. What was the capacity of the ark?
Well, enormous. It really was. Ships in the past have been built for speed and manoeuvrability, but Noah's Ark was only built for 2 reasons. Huge capacity, amazing stability. Well, we've talked about stability already, haven't we? But you see, Noah's Ark could actually hold 522 double-decker rail cars, 240 sheep per car. That's a total of 125,000 sheep. But that's with lots of fresh air around them. You see, if you pack things in like sardines, sardines into a can, you can fit 350,000 of my models inside of Noah's Ark. That's about the average size of a person. So you can actually get 3.5 grand final crowds inside of Noah's Ark, packed in like sardines.
Okay.
So there's great capacity, really, when you think about it.
It's helpful to have a picture of the grand final to be able to, think about all those people.
Yeah, all those people, yeah.
And then picture it like that. Okay, so question 8, Rod.
Yeah.
How many animals went onto the ark? I get this question a lot from my students.
Well, 2 of every unclean animal, bird and creeping thing went onto the ark. But the clean ones went in by 7 pairs, males and females. And remember in the Old Testament, they used to sacrifice bulls and sheep and goats and doves, all pointing to the final sacrifice of Christ on the cross at Calvary. Well, there wasn't that many of them, but they went in by 7s. Now, I get skeptics coming up to me all the time saying, Rod, how could all the hundreds of thousands of breed of animal, how would they ever fit on the ark? Well, the problem is they never read the Bible. See, the Bible's very clear. They went in according to kind, not breed.
And what's the difference?
Well, let's take the dog kind. You've got hundreds of breed of dog in the world today. Go back 100 years ago, no one needed a number of breed. Go right back to Noah, right? You only needed 2 original wolf-type dogs. That's the same, of course, for the, kangaroos, bears, horses, etc. And the clean ones, like the sheep, went in by 7s. See, God, with his great creative ability, he purposed a tremendous variety to come forth within each kind to adapt to the great variety of conditions throughout the world. For example, the wolves have adapted to snow and ice conditions of Canada and Alaska. What would happen if you're a short-haired dog got left up there in the autumn? You'd freeze to death. You'd be meat for the wolves. You'd be better off like the dingo adapting to hot and warm conditions of Australia, wouldn't you? And many people like Charles Darwin mistakenly interpret this variety as evolution when it's simply diversity within God's created kind. As with the dog kind, the many breeds are due to a loss of or a thinning out or loss of genetic information. See, they've never found anything of increasing information. It's always thinning out or loss of genetic information.
So to go from those original kinds to all the different breeds that we have today, we're actually, even though it looks like we might be increasing, we're losing information.
Yeah.
But they have had the genetic ability in them pre-built in to be able to diversify via natural selection.
That's right, yeah. Same with people, like if you're, for example, blue-eyed and pale, you're very adapted to Northern Europe and Northern Russia, aren't you, because you still get enough vitamin D sort of thing. And so taking all this information into account about the kind and so forth, John Woodruff, an American scientist, did an intensive 7-year study. He worked out that only 16,000, at the most, animals, birds and creeping things went into the ark. And the medium size was only that big, about the size of a small rat. And he said only 11% were larger than a sheep. So the great majority were very, very tiny. And so there's plenty of room, wasn't there, for all the animals, all the food and all the water. For example, if they didn't catch any water off the roof, 9% of the volume was needed for water. If they weren't hibernated, they ate every day, 12% of the volume was needed for food. So there's plenty of room on Noah's Ark for not only, animals, but also for people. If people had taken notice of his preaching at that time, there's still room for quite a lot of people to go on board Noah's Ark.
All right, so let's go on to question 9.
Right.
How did they clean up all the mess?
Well, assuming that the large animals went in as juveniles or babies, right, they didn't even have to clean up. For example, in northern Sweden, they keep animals under the house for up to 7 months. That's a long time, long cold winters. They use a method called deep litter.
Okay,
wood shavings, peat moss, straw, deep enough, right? It will easily last the 7-month winter, been proven to last up to 2 years. So 12 months on the ark will be no problem for deep litter. See, the animals kick the stuff around, it dries out quickly. Okay. And so it's a great method. So why bother with any more intensive method when all you need is deep litter?
Okay. So they could have been prepared for this?
Well, I think God would have known that. He would have organised that. I mean, people have been doing this for many, many years, yeah.
Okay, question 10. How did Noah collect all the animals?
Well, he didn't have to. The Bible's very clear. God did 2 miracles. God brought the animals, God shut the door. And you've got to remember at that time there's only a single landmass. The devastation of the flood to separate the continents hadn't happened yet. And so all the animals were on the one continent and God brought them to the ark. Okay.
Question 11. Was the flood very devastating?
Oh, it certainly was. I mean, this was an amazing event that, first time it happened, it's never happened since. And on the 17th day of the 2nd month of the 600th year of Noah's life, all the fountains of the great deep just burst open. Can you imagine that? Then the rain was pouring like a tropical storm 40 days and 40 nights. Earthquakes, volcanoes, all happening simultaneously.
And this is what the Bible is describing?
The Bible's describing that. Dense ocean floor was then subducting into the mantle, ripping and pulling the single pre-flood landmass apart, not slow and gradual as evolution teaches, but rapid catastrophic plate tectonics are happening. See, not only were the people, the cities, the animals destroyed, but the whole landscape was just ripped up. And then and layers of strata laid down. Do you know the average depth of water-laid strata worldwide? 1.6 kilometres deep. Amazing, the depth of water-laid strata. Also, many of these layers, like at the Grand Canyon, what an amazing... we've been there, actually, checked it out. If you can imagine, yes, pancakes, maybe you've got some different coloured pancakes. You stack them up, say a dozen pancakes. That's the Grand Canyon. You've got all these layers of different water-laid strata run for hundreds of kilometres. And, of course, at the Kaibab Warp, they must have been, still wet, still soft, because God's raised up the plateau, and these layers fold over each other like soft plasticine, like I say, because they're still soft and still wet. Imagine trying to bend this stuff on the evolution time frame of 1.2 kilometres thick hard rock. It would obviously in places break and shatter to pieces, wouldn't it?
So we can see those folds and bends.
You can see it, yeah. I mean, around the world there are so many examples of folded strata where, it's impossible to do that once it becomes hot, brittle. You could do it yourself. You could experiment yourself. You get some clay and, layer it different colours. Bend it, you know what I mean? Or let it go hard and dry.
And then
break, shatter to pieces. It's just common sense, isn't it, really? Now, many of these layers, we find a knife-edge difference, right? And the bottom layer is supposedly 10 million years older than the top layer on the evolution time frame. But there's a big problem, you see, for people who believe in millions of years. And I've got a good question for them. So my question is, Jess, why was there no erosion or not much erosion between those layers for the supposed 10 million years? I've been to England several times. I've looked around at the coast and both south, east, and most of the coast, actually. I watched a documentary one day, and the guy was pointing up the east coast of England, and he said 5 kilometres out there used to be a village a few hundred years ago. Also, in the same part of the coast, there was a church built 4 kilometres from the coast 500 years ago. It's now half a kilometre from the coast. So the amazing amount of erosion. Well, Nancy and I, we've actually been there and done a lot of investigation. We've taken hundreds of photos, and you even find roads leading to nowhere. Well, a few years ago, they were leading somewhere. And we come across these World War II bunkers, well over 100 metres out to sea. When I was born, they were still well inland. So the erosion is incredible. White cliffs in England are really amazing. Have you ever seen those? They're spectacular cliffs. Well, the Belltout Lighthouse is a bed and breakfast lighthouse on the south coast. And the people who own it are very smart. In 1998, they found themselves only 3 metres from the edge of the cliff because a huge amount had just fallen into the sea. So they employed engineers to put the whole building on rollers. They spent 240,000 English pounds and they moved it many metres back. Well, guess what? Nearly ready to be moved again.
Like it's on the rollers so they can move it again.
And if you drive a few kilometres away, you come to a place called Birling Gap. Now, Birling Gap, in 1930, there was a row of houses, right? Along the road, they have those all connected houses in England, and pointing down to the sea. But the one nearest the sea was 50 metres off the edge of the cliff.
Okay.
When we went there, not the one nearest the sea, but the first one, right up the other end, was 1 metre from the edge of the cliff. I checked with the authorities. They told me that the erosion on these cliffs is 1 metre per annum. Now, England's supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old. That's what they say, isn't it? Well, let's take a fraction of 1%, say 1 million years. Let's multiply 1 million years by 1 metre of erosion. That's 1,000 kilometres. Narrowest part of England is under 100 k's across. And let's remember, there are other parts of England that are disappearing at 7 metres per annum. So erosion is a big problem for people. When you're talking about these layers at the Grand Canyon, how could there be hardly any erosion for 10 million years when we just look at the enormous amount of erosion happening just in my lifetime?
that timescale says some of these things shouldn't even exist anymore if they're
Of
really
course,
that old.
That's right, yeah. So it's interesting. And not only is the coast, I mean, I'll just give you a few snippets today, but you've got inland erosion, mountains eroding, you've got so much erosion happening all over the world. Yeah.
Hope you're enjoying the interview so far. We'll jump back in shortly. But real quick, imagine bringing this life-changing message to your church or community. This is exactly what we do. We present at close to 1,000 events each year. So many people struggle with how science and the Bible fit together, and it becomes a genuine stumbling block to their faith. But our speakers present satisfying answers that really make sense. We've received hundreds, possibly thousands of testimonies from people who have had their lives changed through our speaking ministry. If you'd like that for your congregation or community, then use the link in the description and contact us today. Question 13. Rod, how does this apply to the Grand Canyon? You mentioned this before.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the Grand Canyon, evolutionists tend to believe that it took 40 million years to carve out, you see. And but we can give you evidence today. It doesn't take anywhere near that time. Mount St Helens in the 1980s, there was something like 200 metres or 800 feet of strata laid down in a very, very short time. In fact, in just a few hours one day, you got 8 metres of 25 feet, 8 metres of strata laid, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of micro layers, all laid down in a very, very short time. And then what happened was that there's a lake that formed at the top of this volcano. Well, one day it burst open. This massive mudslide and flood ripped down the mountain. It carved out a 1/40 scale Grand Canyon. Well, on the evolution time frame, you're talking about maybe 1 million years. Well, one day it wasn't there, the next day it was. Just a few hours in one day. Why do you need 40 million for the real one? You don't, do you? All you need is a lot more water, like the worldwide flood. And I don't think really anybody can get their head around the incredible catastrophic forces unfolding at the time of the worldwide flood of Noah. Absolutely unbelievable things happening. And I think even scientists probably can't get their head around what was really happening at that time. Amazing.
So you've actually just answered my next question, 14, which was about the evidence for things being able to happen quickly. So let's move to question 15.
Yeah.
Lots of Christians say that this flood was only a local flood. What do you say to that?
Yeah, well, most people who believe in millions of years believe it was a local flood. And so let's just check the logic out, see if it makes any sense for a local flood. Why would Noah build this massive ocean liner, right, for a local flood? Why not just migrate to higher ground? For example, recently an Arctic fox was fitted with a satellite collar, and the researchers couldn't believe the incredible distance that it travelled from, it was from Norway to Canada over the ice in 4 months, 4,400 kilometres, which is about 2,700 miles. So incredible distance by one little fox over that time. Also, if you go back into history and you look at the pioneers that travelled across from the east coast to the west coast in their covered wagons, well, a lot of people, by the way, will walk next to the wagons because it was too uncomfortable in the wagon. So with these examples of people being able to walk so far in just a few months, why would Noah build this massive ark, and spend 100 years perhaps building this ark when he just needed to walk to higher ground? Why would the birds go on board? They could easily fly to safety, couldn't they? And not only that, the Bible says very clearly God said he would never flood the world again. And he actually labours that quite a bit, saying he gave a covenant to Noah that he would never flood the world again. And so if it was a local flood, God's broken his promise hundreds and hundreds of times, hasn't he? But you see, it wasn't a local flood. It was a worldwide flood. So the Bible tells us all the pre-flood mountains were covered in water. All mankind died. Every land-dwelling, herb-breathing animal, bird-creeping thing died. In fact, every living substance on the face of the land, the Bible says, was just wiped off. Only Noah was alive and those with him in the ark. And the ark floated for an incredible 150 days before coming to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And then, of course, many months later, Noah sent out the dove the second time, came back with the olive leaf, because all the vegetation had to regrow, and, of course, everything had to dry out. And eventually, after 371 days, God told Noah to leave the ark. Does that sound like a local flood to you? 371 days?
Not really.
Certainly not, is it? Yeah. And so there's really nobody needs to ever believe in a local flood. They're really, what's happening here is very clear. They're taking information from outside of the Bible, they're applying it to the Bible, that the world is millions of years old, so they have to come up with this compromise of a local flood. It's not true. It was definitely a worldwide flood.
Okay. All right, question 16. Then where did all this water go?
Well, when we look at a globe, you look at a globe, okay, and you look at the land, you look at the water. The world, 72% of the world is water in area, only 28% land. So if we flatten down all the land, then we uplift those deep oceans, we make everything dead flat around the world, there's enough water to cover the whole world by nearly 3 kilometres deep. The water's still here. God just rearranged things. Psalm 104, 5-9 tells us, doesn't it? God pushed up the mountains. He pulled down the valleys in the ocean. As he pulled down the valleys, all the water runs off, doesn't it?
So he's telling us how he did it.
He tells us how he did it. And, of course, all these horizontal pancake layers filled with fossils were in certain places crunched up by the vertical tectonic forces. You see, that's why the Himalayan mountains are covered in seashell fossils to the very top of the mountain. They weren't there before the flood. They were created by the flood. Nancy and I, we travelled from Gippsland once to the coast over the top of the mountain. And there's a guy at one of our meetings, and he said he saw, when he saw the road being cut through the top of the mountain, they stopped work for a few days. Fish fossils that big at the top of the mountain because pancake layers have been crunched up.
In a place where there's no bodies of water.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah. But it makes sense, you see, doesn't it? See, only the Bible can make sense of our mountain ranges and all of these things, and only the flood can make sense of what we see in the world today.
Okay, moving on from this, question 17 is about what happened next. So after they left the ark, what happened?
Well, God told them to be fruitful and multiply. How many people live in the world today? 8 billion. Just before I was born, 2 billion. Go back to 1650, 500 million. If you're a mathematician, working backwards on the population graph, you can't really go back beyond the time of Noah. But of course, if you watch those evolution documentaries, they say, oh, man's been roaming around for 50,000, 100,000 years. Good storytelling, but there's certainly no science in it, is there? So, it makes sense for the Bible, really, doesn't it? And, of course, it tells us clearly that, the Bible tells us very clearly that every person in the whole world has descended from Shem, Ham, Japheth and their wives. Noah's the great-grandfather of every one of the 8 billion living in the world today.
Which leads us into question 18. What about all the different people groups that we have?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. When you look at, you got the African people, the Chinese people, the Aborigines and so forth. But, there's only one race in the world. Is that true? It's the human race. And we all have the same colouring in our skin. It's called melanin. It all depends on how little we have for how light we are, how much we have for how dark we are, and everything in between. And it's interesting that some people who are mid-brown, we've seen lots of twins born around the world where one of them comes out, pale skin, blonde hair, blue eyes. But the other one comes out brown skin, brown eyes and dark hair. And so it's easy to see what happened at the Tower of Babel, isn't it? You see, because what happened there was God split up the population, and so you had all these different languages organised by God, and they had the genetic makeup to start developing different people groups around the world. As I said before, if you're blue-eyed and blonde, you're very well adapted to Northern Europe because, you pale skin, you still get enough vitamin D. Nancy's mother actually had disease. She's Maori descent, and she was living in northern England. And because of her dark skin, she didn't get enough vitamin D. And so she had diseases that had to be dealt with because she obviously would be better off living in a place where there's plenty of sunshine.
Okay, question 19. Is there any other evidence for a worldwide flood?
Absolutely. Billions of fossils showing clear evidence of rapid burial. In fact, some of the fossil records are so delicate, like insect wings, jellyfish, they disappear in hours in the tropics. But what do you find? Jellyfish perfectly preserved with all their tentacles. Billions of fish with the fins sticking up rigid, buried alive by their billions. I've done a lot of fishing. I know that top fin, it relaxes back when the fish is dead. But you've got all these fish swimming along in the flood. Suddenly, there's probably a tidal wave of mud envelops them. And, of course, they quickly expire in the mud, but they're still swimming. That's why all those fins are sticking up.
Buried alive.
Billions of them, buried alive by the billions. We even find fish eating another fish. Have you ever watched a documentary on TV when they see a fish eating a fish, catching a fish? It's so fast, they slow the action down so you can see it. Well, you've got this picture in the rock now of a fish, heaps of them, eating other fish. Extinct ichthyosaur, for example, given birth to its young. There's another great evidence, actually, of rapid burial are polystrate tree fossils. Now, these tree fossils can go up to 25 metres, they've been found 25 metres through the strata, and they cut through multi layers of strata. Now, this is no problem for a creationist, but it's a big problem for people who believe in millions of years. See, the difference in time from the bottom of the tree to the top of the tree on the evolution time frame is mega time. Really, how could a tree stand up for, say, 1 million years and not rot away?
If the layers are just slowly building up.
Yeah, that's right. You know what I mean? If it's supposed to be all that slow and gradual over millions of years, tree would be rotted away, wouldn't it? Because they do rot away. Insects destroy them, fires destroy them. They're gone in a few decades. And so some of these trees are even upside down and they cut into coal seams. They believe coal seams are millions of years old. Well, how long does it take to make coal? We can turn good wood into coal in less than a month. Quite easy. It's very super simple. It's very easy to do.
Okay.
In fact, all of the things that are supposed to take millions of years can happen very, very fast. I picked up a brochure in Katoomba and it said it takes millions of years to make an opal. Well, there's a man at Lightning Ridge. He mixes up a bit of slurry, plonks them on the shelf in his tin shed. In a few weeks, he's got a beautiful opal. So you don't need millions of years for those things. Also, if you ever been in those caves and, the stalactites? I picked up a brochure at the Wellington Caves, and on the brochure it's got that these are millions of years old. But in Australia, there's a mine that was only closed for 55 years. And you've got 2 miners for scale. You've got these really long stalactites, right, that were created in just 55 years. So you don't need millions of years for stalactites, do you? I took a picture in Western Australia of a wooden water wheel. It's now turned to solid stone. There's a guy in Tasmania, he left a beautiful soft felt hat down the mine. Well, guess what? It's now a hard hat. See, all you need is the right condition. You can turn all these things into fossils in no time at all.
And they're all examples that...
They're just good examples. You don't need millions of years, you see. We're always told there's millions of years, but it's not needed, as you can see with the stalactites, making opals, or any of these things. Yeah.
All right, the next one is another favourite of my students, question 20.
Right.
Did the dinosaurs go on the ark?
Well, they did, but you wouldn't take a big one, would you? It make more sense to take a baby or a juvenile dinosaur on board. See, dinosaurs like crocodiles, they come from an egg, right? Even the largest dinosaur came from an egg only that big. I've got a dinosaur egg at home. It's only that big for a smaller dinosaur. But like I say, even the biggest ones come from an egg that big. So Noah could have taken a juvenile dinosaur on board, no bigger than a dog or something like that.
Why do we assume they had to be fully grown?
Yeah, why assume? That's right. Yeah, it makes sense you take a smaller one on board. Yeah. In the book of Job, it describes this huge animal called behemoth, had a tail like a cedar tree. Now, this is definitely not a hippopotamus or an elephant like it's described in some Bible commentaries. I mean, their tail would be better described as a bonsai tree, wouldn't it? They only got a tiny little tail. And also, if we go back in written history, we find many written accounts of people killing, describing these monsters. In the Walsh Chronicles, it's the oldest written history in Britain. It describes this brave king. He went out to defend the city, but it went on to say the monster ate him up like a little fish. He wasn't very successful, was he? But then you look at St George. He killed a dinosaur. But you see, he killed a dragon. So it's just a new name for dragon. Dinosaur is just a new name for dragon.
Okay, so he called it a dragon.
Yeah.
But it could actually have just been referring to the dinosaur.
You see, the word dinosaur was only invented about 180 years ago.
Okay.
And so you don't find the word dinosaur in the Bible or anything like that, do you? But you do find things like behemoth, leviathan, dragon, just different names for the same animal. Now, Marco Polo, in his travels throughout Asia, he describes this huge animal that was about 10 metres long, had eyes bigger than a 4-penny loaf. So it must have been 4 pennies, a lot of money back then. And very glaring, okay? And 2 short legs with 3 claws near the head. And the jaws were actually wide enough, he says, to swallow a man. The teeth were large and sharp. He went on to say that any man or animal that went near it were terrified for their life. This is just Marco Polo reporting matter of fact in his journal. Also, Nancy and I, we went to the Carlisle Cathedral in England, and we saw for ourselves the brass plaque on the Bishop Bell's gravesite. And you've got he's 500 years ago,
okay,
and you've got these 2 long-tailed dinosaurs fighting. I mean, how could they do this without having seen the animals? You know what I mean? In Montana and Alaska, they've actually found dinosaur bones that are still soft. Even got the soft, smelly tissue, red blood cells in them. And it seems like common sense is missing here, isn't it? That anybody would believe that soft bone, smelly tissue, red blood cells could last for 65 million years. Of course they're not, because all those dinosaurs were actually laid down, the fossils were laid down in the great flood of Noah, not millions of years ago.
All right. Question 21. We're nearly there. How did all the people and the animals get to the different continents?
Well, the answer to that is the Ice Age. See, during the flood, you had incredible volcanic activity happening, fountains of the deep. You had very warm oceans by the end of the flood. So you had a massive amount of evaporation. And, of course, with the volcanic activity, you had a lot of dust in the air, so you would have had cooler summers and so forth. So you had this massive dumping of snow on the poles and even some high mountains around the world, causing the one and only Ice Age, which built up over 500 years. Now, at the peak, you would have sea levels way down. And so you've got land bridges connecting the continents. It's really interesting. I was listening to the story time of Aborigines at the top of Australia, and they were matter of fact speaking about their ancestors having walked from Asia through Indonesia to Australia. And then much later on, of course, as the Ice Age melted back over another probably couple of 100 years and the sea levels rose, they said the sea levels come up, they could no longer do that. And so land bridges were a good thing for animals and people to go out into the different parts of the world. But of course, once they were cut off, I think that's why you see different types of animals in Africa to, say, South America and Australia, you know what I mean? Because those land bridges eventually just got cut off.
And what are these land bridges made of?
Well, it's basically the land. You see, what you've got is, as the sea levels went down, okay, it exposed the very shallow And even evolutionists believe that the sea floors, you had this sort of activity happening, what we call the time of the flood. So, they must have sunk later, or the waters come up and destroyed the land bridges. But not only land bridges, rafting is another way of animals getting around the world. There was actually a raft of trees and stuff that was noticed one time off the coast of USA. And it travelled something like 1,600 kilometres with trees 9 metres high on it. And others have, found, like these islands and that come out of the sea, volcanic islands. It's not long before, debris arrives, floating debris and trees and things, but they've got animals and insects and stuff on them, and so they start to populate. And remember, you only need one pregnant female to start a new colony.
Mm-hmm. Well, if they can grow trees on them, some of these rafts could certainly have all sorts of animals being able to travel on them as well.
Yeah. Well, there was one I read about where these pumas went down the Parana River in South America, and there's 4 of them on this big raft, went way down the river, and they arrived in this town, and they're found prowling around the town. So,
a bit scary.
That was interesting, wasn't it?
All right. Last one, question 22. There have been reports of Noah's Ark being found over the years. Do you have anything to say about these claims?
Well, I think the recent one, which is the rock formation in Turkey, I've had a lot of people talking about that.
Tell us about it. What's
it's like a pointy shape, and it's sort of like this shape.
And it's a rock.
Like a rock, yeah.
Like a rock.
But many scientists associated with CMI have been there, and they said this is not the Ark. I think you can go further afield and you'll find another one, not quite the same size, but to me it's just basically a rock shape. So I don't believe that. I never really talk about finding the Ark myself when I do talks, because, we can't sort of say, oh, well, I'll take you up here and show you, you know what I mean? I'm probably a bit different to some of the others, but I agree with, say, Vance Nelson, that he believes that it's up in the ice on Mount Ararat, because the ice is about 1,000 foot thick. And I've got another book at home that documents hundreds of these sightings over some of the sightings back to before Christ. And they all come up, this is before cameras and that, with a similar box-type shape. So, but like I say, I think we need to really stick to the concrete evidence. So it's an interesting thing. John Morris has been up there, the son of Henry Morris, he's been up there looking for it many times, but he's never found anything. I did have an interesting thing happen to me at Coorong about 23 years ago. And a guy come up to me. I had the model there at Coorong and showing people. And he tapped me on the shoulder. He said, Rod, I'm George Gopi, grandson. My grandfather walked on the Ark. So, you know what I mean? He didn't look like he was lying. He seemed to know a lot about it. So, of course, if you look at Vance Nelson's book, he's got a big documented thing on George actually climbing up on the Ark and having a look. But like I say, that would have been in a time when maybe the ice had melted back a lot more than it is today, because the ice is up to 1,000 foot thick. But once again, like I say, I don't really look at that all the time, because I think when you look at the true evidence that you can see with your own eyes, you look at the fossils, you look at the strata, around the world, which is, an average of 1.6 kilometres deep, filled with fossils. You've got to say, well, the only logical explanation of that is a worldwide flood. So I think we need to stick to the real concrete evidence.
Rod, if you were to sum up with a lesson about what this teaches us when we look at the account of the Ark and the flood and why God sent the flood, what would you say we can learn from this?
Well, the thing is, God judged the world. You know, the Bible tells us that we've all sinned, and we'll all be. We live so long, the Bible says, and then we go to judgment. But there's only, just like Noah was safe on the ark, the only way that we can not go to that judgment is to believe in Jesus Christ. You could say he's really the ark for us today. We all need to believe in the finished work of Christ. See, the one who hung on that cross was the creator of the universe, and he poured out his precious blood for the forgiveness of our sins. And he also says that he is the door. Remember, there's only one door into the ark, and Jesus Christ is the door into heaven. And there's no other way. The Bible's very clear. Jesus says he's the way, he's the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him.
Well, thank you, Rod. We've gone through 22 amazing questions about Noah's Ark and the flood. We actually have a book that answers 60 of these questions, a lot to do with the Ark and the flood, the age of the earth. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, it's the Answers book, really. And I think the Answers book, apart from the Creation magazine, is the best book that anybody can get. Because, like you say, it's got 60 of the most asked questions. So any of the things dealing with the flood are all covered in this book. And I find that, to me, it was very helpful, especially early in the stages when I started to go out, giving talks on Noah's Ark. In fact, this is a go-to book for anybody, I think, to really understand the arguments, such as the flood and the fossils and the strata, plate tectonics, etc., and how animals got to various parts of the world and populations and things like that. So many good answers in this book.
And Rod, we're actually going to give viewers a free ebook. The link will be below in the description. Rod, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Jess.